Welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for June 5th through June 11th of 2023. If you don't know me already, my name is Cam White. Thank you guys so much for being here. You're probably wondering why I'm in a hotel. Well, I'm sure some of you would love to see a video of me in a hotel. I'm actually in between houses right now and I'm getting ready to move. So the next 2 weeks horoscopes will probably be in this hotel room for the meantime. Long story short, Saturn's my Time Lord. It's in my fourth house. My fourth ruler got squared by Mars. Long story, but there's astrology behind it. Anyway, few other announcements. One is, unfortunately / fortunately, the green screen is going away. If you still want the green screen, Parker, put up a green screen. We're no longer doing the green screen. I think we're going to come back to this kind of sit down, chat with you guys sort of thing. The new place, it will be a little bit difficult to get a green screen setup already going. So welcome to these kind of videos. I hope you enjoy all of the effort Parker is going to put into editing everything nicely. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this week. We're starting off Monday with the moon ingressing into Capricorn and making a sextile to Saturn, enshrining Jupiter. So now that we're off of this full moon, right? Full moon in Sagittarius, I talked a little bit last week about it's kind of like just where are we going? What's next? The full moon's all about illuminating things, right? Illuminating the dark, illuminating what we don't always get to see. But it's in Sagittarius, so it's like where it's the future, what's our vision, what's our endpoint, what's beyond the horizon. And now that the moon is now waning and going into Capricorn, it's time to get a little bit more serious about things. I talk a lot about the moon in Capricorn being a good time to detach emotionally, just get some work done. And I think as the moon makes a sextile to Saturn, Saturn's now in Pisces, right? So when it comes to maturity, responsibility, structure, discipline, it's in that water, that mutable water sign. It's kind of just calling it how it is or playing things by ear. Saturn in Aquarius and Capricorn is like, you need to be very rigid and responsible because these are very like structured signs, versus Pisces is like, well, you just have to be adaptable. You have to be malleable in terms of where you take your responsibility or what structure looks like for you, right? Not everything stays the same. Like change is always kind of the constant in the universe. And I like that for Saturn and Pisces. So as the moon's in Capricorn making a sextile to Saturn and Pisces, there's this level of kind of detaching from things, just getting the work done and finding that helpful for dealing with Saturn and Pisces, finding that helpful for like, okay, I can do things differently. I can still be responsible, still be rigid, but find a way to make changes as I go along. And then the moon is going to make a trine to Jupiter, which is exciting because Jupiter is now in Taurus. If we're talking about Jupiter, we're talking about hope, optimism, faith, spirituality. And there's a lot of, I made a whole Jupiter and Taurus video, but the Jupiter and Taurus is just kind of like really maximizing, and satiating or saturating, quality over quantity, making sure things feel good, making sure things feel stable and secure. And so I think as the moon separates from Saturn and trines Jupiter, there is this level of like, hey, this feels good to do. Like I'm doing the right thing, which I think is nice. And especially because it's a waning moon. So the moon is decreasing in light. It's kind of like this calming down into things. Also on Monday, one of our main highlights for the week is Venus is going to ingress into Leo. I just got done talking about this over on my Patreon. If you guys want to support the channel and get monthly rising sign horoscopes, as well as this next week, this Wednesday, I'll be doing a live Ask Me Anything episode, which I always do the first Wednesday of the month. But anyway, Venus is going to be in Leo for the next 5 months. So all of June, July, August, September, and October, Venus will be in Leo. So we have quite a while for Venus to be there, right? We're getting ready for the Venus retrograde in Leo, which I will be making a video about, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can get updated on that. But this doesn't necessarily start the Venus retrograde, right? Because we still need to have Venus enter shadow, but we're going to get a real good taste of what we're dealing with for the next few months. And this is Venus. We're talking about love, romance, beauty, connection, indulgence, fun. I love that song, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. And I like that song because I used to DJ weddings and it was always fun to play. Funny story about that song. I found out a guy wrote that song. I think that's a little ironic, but Venus goes into Leo, and Leo is all about being in the spotlight, being the center of attention, being seen, being witnessed. And a friend of mine just recently, kind of reminded me like Leo is all about like putting the light on everything. Like everyone gets to share the light. But with Venus, it's a lot more fun. Mars is still in Leo, right? So Mars is fights and conflicts, drama, inflammation in Leo. So Mars in Leo is very like acting out in a very passionate way. Funny enough, long story why I'm here in this hotel is I had a really big falling out with my roommate, and boy, was I Mars and Leo squaring Jupiter. I fucking popped off. But Venus now, it's like Mars and Leo is so much more like taking things in a personal way or being kind of bombastic or egotistical and acting out. But Venus is making it more fun. Venus is making it more like Mars is just irritated and frustrated versus the drama can be fun with Venus and Leo. But as Venus goes into Leo, there is more of this focus on connection and fun and, you know, beauty related to being seen, being witnessed, being glorified, being put in the spotlight. Venus and Leo loves to be in the spotlight. But Venus is going to go opposite Pluto. So what I find interesting about this is with Pluto and Aquarius, which I'm considering making a video about certain topics that relate to Pluto and Aquarius that have happened recently. But Pluto is all about power and control and fear. And it's in the sign of Aquarius, which Aquarius represents society, the people, you know, any type of group or organization that you can think of. And as Venus goes opposite Pluto, and opposition is like being at odds with something. And what you want to do, where you want to be in the spotlight, where you want to be seen and witnessed, not everyone may like that. It's easy to hate the performer on the stage, right? But most people would never want to be in the spotlight because they're too nervous, they're too afraid, and they feel more comfortable being in the crowd where they can just be with everyone else's opinions and not have to shine themselves. So why I'm saying this is with Venus going into Leo, going opposite Pluto, you kind of just have to be like yourself. I know that sounds corny or very stereotypical, but there's this level of just embracing being in the spotlight, embracing the way that you want to be seen. And if people are going to hate you, guess what? They're going to hate you no matter what you do. But if you let the crowd have more power and control over you rather than you dictating how things go, you're not going to have a good time. So on Monday, I would really, you know, let yourself, especially with the moon making these nice transits, like feeling a little bit more emotionally secure. You're going to, you know, put yourself out in the spotlight, and people may not like it, but some people may like it. And you just got to enjoy, and you got to be like honest with what you want. So now we go into Tuesday. On Tuesday, we're just going to have the moon make a trine to both Uranus and then Mercury. So again, the moon's in Capricorn still. We're still in this kind of detached mode. We're still in this, you know, business. I always think of Unikitty from Lego Movie where it's like business, numbers, business working.
Business, numbers. Is this working?
The moon's going to make a trine to Uranus where, okay, the moon making a trine to Uranus, it's not always the biggest deal, okay? But it's like a happy accident. It's like, you know, maybe, for example, you're at a hotel in a casino or something like that, and you're waiting for somebody. So you just put $20 in a slot machine, hit max bet. Hey, maybe you win $200. That's like the moon in Capricorn trining Uranus and Taurus. It's like you're just not really, you're not there to gamble. You're just kind of maybe passing time. You're kind of detached from the outcome. Just throw away $20, and something fun might happen. Something, you know, unexpected might happen. And so on Tuesday, it's not like, oh my God, there's all these unexpected events happening, but there's this little surprise on Tuesday that might make you feel more uplifted, or it's moon in Capricorn, right? Like, sweet, I just won $200. I keep thinking of that TikTok audio where it's like, damn, I just saved myself $150.
Wow, I just saved myself $150.
But then right after that, the moon trines Mercury. And with Mercury still in Taurus, our minds, our thoughts, our plans, and the way that we communicate is still focused on, again, you know, stability, value, security. We're still pretty fixated. We're still pretty stubborn with our mindset. That gets to change later on this week. But as the moon trines Mercury, there's this kind of like, you know, people who are typically really stubborn are stubborn for a reason. It's because they know that they're right. And while other people may not like that, when you get to the eventual outcome, they go, see, I told you so. And so I think the moon being in Taurus, making that trine to Mercury is kind of like a validation of like, hey, I'm glad I was thinking of things this way. I'm glad I planned things this way because this is the way that they're going. We get to Wednesday, and the moon is then going to ingress into Aquarius. And we have a lot of lunar transits going on Wednesday. The moon's going to ingress into Aquarius. It's going to conjoin Pluto. Then it's going to go opposite Venus. And then it's going to square Jupiter. And then it's going to go opposite Mars. Wednesday is emotionally turbulent. Like, expect just hour by hour for things to change. As the moon goes into Aquarius, emotions, our body, our feelings are much more attached to the group dynamic, to the crowd, to other people's thoughts and opinions. And again, I know I'm pretty harsh on Aquarius stuff. I mean, we also just had a very harsh Aquarius transit. And now with the triplicity shift, which was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, and now Pluto's in Aquarius, we have a long time to deal with more of the harsh part of the Aquarius stuff. But that doesn't mean all, group influence is bad, right? Like sometimes you have to take criticism from other people. Sometimes you have to listen to what the group dynamic says. And I see that being a key point while the moon goes into Aquarius. The main issue is the moon's going to go into Aquarius and conjoin Pluto. And it's just kind of like, like for example, like I'm a YouTuber. Every now and then I try to ask for feedback. I'm like, what can I do better? Or what am I doing wrong? And I don't want to say I instantly regret it, because some of you that leave comments do end up leaving very constructive comments for me. But there's other times where people are just like, you should just change your whole life and your personality and everything that you do, because everything you do is wrong. And when you have the moon conjoining Pluto in Aquarius, like I ask you, like, how much do you let the fear of other people's opinions dictate everything? Because the moon connected to Pluto is like being like, okay, I'll do whatever anyone says. Okay, I'll totally fix and change myself to be more like the group. For all my Gen Zs out there, or maybe even late millennials, you might remember this episode of Fairly Odd Parents where everyone's a gray blob and the whole sky is gray and everything's gray. And I think there's like a pink ball and everyone's like, get rid of that pink ball. It needs to be gray just like everything else. That's what Aquarius kind of reminds me of. And as the moon conjoins Pluto, there's just this level of like catering to it a little bit. And I think there needs to be a fine balance between listening to other people's feedback, seeing what other people say about something, but not let it being like, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to agree what everyone else is agreeing with because I don't want to disagree and I don't want to go against the grain. Like having a good balance with that, which is definitely difficult. And then right after that, the moon goes opposite Venus. And this is the hard part. And this is why I'm teeing this up this way, is because as the moon goes opposite Venus, again, an opposition is like literally like an opposition. Like those two planets are at odds with one another. They stay completely opposite. Venus is in Leo. Venus is like, hey, I just want to do whatever the hell I want to do. I want to, be in the spotlight. And the moon going into Aquarius is like, all right, well, girl, it's not your time to be in the spotlight. Like this isn't the time and place for that. And there might be truth to that. And I think as the moon goes opposite Venus, again, there has to be this balance of like, for example, if you're in a group setting, maybe you want to share one of your own stories to, connect with someone more, but maybe it's more focused on someone else just sharing their story. And that's not always, and I know a lot of people like me, like I share my own experience with whatever someone else, like if someone's sharing a story, I like share my own experience doing the similar thing to connect. But then sometimes like people are like, oh, you're making it about you, and I'm not. But that's kind of the dynamic that I'm seeing here. And it's like the moon opposite Venus. There's like this uncomfortable feeling of like trying to relate to one another, trying to connect with people, but it kind of diminishing your light almost in a sense. But then the moon is going to make a square to Jupiter. So there's this level of, what I find funny about Jupiter and Taurus with it squaring the Aquarius stuff is like sometimes, I don't want to say not doing anything is better than doing something, but a lot of Jupiter and Taurus is slow and steady wins the race. And I think as the moon separates from the opposition to Venus and squares Jupiter, there's just this level of being like, I'll just be patient. I'll just, I'll take it what it is. I'm not going to let it hurt my ego. Because again, it may not be your time to talk. It may not be your turn to be in the spotlight. And you kind of have just to embrace that and just be in the moment. And, again, the slow and steady wins the race. Just be patient about it. And and the other thing too is like, you get to this point, you've ever been like, again, at like a party, someone's sharing their story and then they don't allow other people to share their story, and then they just keep yapping. And that's like the moon in Aquarius squaring Jupiter and Taurus. I'm like, all right, no one's having fun anymore because someone's like taking control over everything. As the moon makes that square to Jupiter, there's that like discomfort, like, hey, this isn't the best way things that could be. This isn't the funnest way that things could be. But I also look at the moon squaring Jupiter as there's a tension between where our emotions are at and where our faith is being placed. So you could look at this as just a test of faith. Just you have to trust the process. Like in the situation that I'm in right now, there's been so like, especially as a man, I want to control everything that I do, right? I have this false illusion of control, but every time I try to take life by the horns and do whatever the hell it is I want to do, I get put back in my place. And it's like, no, I'm on God's time. I'm on the universe's time. It's not up to me. And what has allowed me to deal with this transition better has been just, I have faith in the process. I know I'm going to get wherever I need to go. I know I'm going to be completely taken care of. And I find that much more relaxing and for me to be able to enjoy each moment, because this has been a very stressful couple weeks for me at the moment. So I think as the moon squares Jupiter, there's this level of just let it go. Like, have fun with it. Just know, like, things are going to be fine. The only issue is after the moon separates from Jupiter, it's going to then go opposite Mars. And then this is where we start getting the tension, because Mars is in Leo and it's opposite the moon in Aquarius, where there are really great people who like can have differing opinions and still be friends, and we could still talk about stuff and even talk about a topic that we disagree on, but, you know, walk away just fine. And then there's other people who, you know, you have a disagreeing opinion on them and you bring it up and they just like get super triggered, and it turns into this whole, well, you're wrong because your whole, you know, worldview is incorrect because I have the correct worldview or something like that. And it just kind of gets out of control. And that's how I look at the moon in Aquarius opposite Mars in Leo, is like, there's some people that are going to be able to handle those conversations, and there's other people that aren't. And so I think on Wednesday there is this level of frustration of like there's just no connection, right? Like the moon is in Aquarius where it's like, hey, I'm trying to, you know, be more involved. I'm trying to connect more to people on a societal level. I'm trying to understand things. But Mars is in Leo where there's just this like, you know, I'm going against the grain of that. And, you know, maybe that's you. Maybe you're like, you know, fuck all these people. I'm going to go do whatever I want. And then maybe you're the moon in Aquarius. You're like, hey, like we could all be super cool about it. And it's someone else that's Mars and Leo that's like, no, you're just completely wrong. And, you know, blah, 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 blah. You're just one of these people. And they, you know, put you in a subsection of random people that you don't even agree with. So Wednesday has a lot of lunar transits and it's a little all over the place. I think you will probably leave Wednesday evening feeling frustrated just because it's the moon opposite Mars, and then it's not till Thursday where we get more lunar transits. So it's one of those things of take it as a lesson. Don't get too frustrated about things. You can't let things get to you, all right? And as we get to Thursday, we have a cat here giving us a little bit more of the horoscope. That's Thomas. Also, breaking news. It's just been discovered that the Sasquatch exists, and there's two of them on the floor above me. So if you hear a bunch of loud stomping noises, it's the two Sasquatch above me. Anyway, we get to Thursday, and the moon is just going to be making a trine to the sun, which, you know, is that it's not that big of a deal. Like the sun and the moon making a trine is literally like the sun is kind of where we're being energized at any given moment. It's in Gemini, so, you know, quick, sudden change, being more communicative, being more social, sharing ideas. And the moon's in Aquarius trining it. So I think like Thursday morning is a little bit of apprehension is not the correct word, but redemption from Wednesday. So the moon shining the sun, it's like, okay, we're getting to share our ideas. There's no frustration. But then the moon will then square Uranus and Mercury. And the problem with this is the moon's in Aquarius. The moon in Aquarius is very similar to the moon in Capricorn, where there is this level of having our emotions slightly detached. That's why it's like, for example, like if you ever watch like a riot, in a riot, you see people that would probably normally be super cool, normal, but because they're in this like hive mind, they do things, you know, that they would normally never would do, but it's because they're like, oh, I can get away with it because I'm a part of this big group. It's not really about me. And so like with the moon in Aquarius, there's this like just almost being in the hive mind, and it's going to make a square to Uranus and Mercury. And there might be something that brings a little bit of instability, brings a little bit of, you know, chaos, and uproots things to where, like, I don't want to say, oh, Thursday a riot's going to happen, but like think about this on a personal level where like if you have a group of people already, right, that are already upset about something, and then you just do a little bit of a nudge, well, you could turn a protest into a riot very, very quickly. And that's what like the moon squaring Uranus looks like to me. It's just like there might be this little nudge that might upset a big thing. But look at this in a personal way. It's like, where are your emotions? And if your emotions are super connected to, you know, ideas that are really outside of your control and that are more about like people and the world at large and not necessarily about you, you might get triggered. In a different way to look at it, it would just be kind of like the moon squaring Uranus. I think the easiest way to look at it is you might be triggered. But then the moon is going to square Mercury. What I love about the Aquarius idea is like we as a society or we as a people share this one same idea, but you can get any group of people, like get a group of astrologers together. they may not even all agree that astrology is real or astrology works or how it works. It's like they might all unite on one idea, but they're not all going to agree on every single part of it. And that's how the moon squaring Mercury kind of looks. And Mercury is still in Taurus, right? We're still very stubborn with our mindset. We're still very fixated in our mindset, very unmovable. And so I think as the moon squares Mercury, you know, maybe you get some sort of information or something is communicated to you, and no one's going to be willing to change their minds. And so I would look at, like, and especially your emotions. Like, the problem with the moon is that the moon is where our emotions are at, and we're very emotional creatures. And if we're not in control of our emotions, you know, we could see ourselves like lash out or do stupid things. And I think as the moon's in Aquarius squaring Mercury, it's like we might receive information that we don't like, and where our mindset is at or where our thoughts are at or what is being communicated is not in alignment with where our emotions are at. And so we just might feel this like internal frustration with how we're feeling and how we're thinking. It's like, you know, where we're thinking, it's like, oh, we might be thinking about this, but then emotionally it's like, oh, we want this result actually. And it's just going to feel like, you ever just get into a conflict with yourself, like an internal conflict, and you just get drained from it because you can't, like, in one way you feel this way, but another way you feel this way, and it's just this combativeness. It's like your heart and your mind are in two different places. That's how I would look at Thursday. So Wednesday and Thursday are a little bit rough emotionally, just because there's so many lunar transits and it's all squares and oppositions. But we leave Thursday and we get into Friday. On Friday, the moon will then ingress into Pisces. It will then sextile Jupiter and conjoin Saturn. I like this transit. This is actually when I'm moving into my new place, moon going into my 4th house, right? Conjoining my Time Lord in the 4th before I go into my 4th house year. The moon's going to go into Pisces, where what I love about Pisces, especially after the whole Capricorn Aquarius thing, is like the zodiac, the archetypes of the zodiac tell a story. And there's, you know, Capricorn where or there's Sagittarius, right? The Sagittarius says we have a vision for things. This is what it reminds me of like Manifest Destiny for like the American, history type stuff. Like we just need to expand and we just need to go. And then Capricorn is like building these systems and regulations and this concrete work around that vision to solidify it. And then Aquarius is like, okay, well, what does it mean to be an industrial society where it's not really agricultural based and it's more industry based, and we all live in apartments now, and now we have screens in our face, and what kind of rules go on the internet, and what can I say and think, and what can I that's the Aquarius stuff, where now you're getting into the ideals and the morals about how society works based off these structures. But then you get into Pisces and there's a lot more dissolving, right? Like you kind of realize, okay, some of these mental structures don't work. Some of these physical structures don't work. Maybe this vision that we had was predicated off of not the best idea. It had good intentions, but maybe it wasn't. And Pisces is about dissolving some of those past ideas and framing a new way of looking at things to where when we go into Aries, we start new again. So as the moon goes into Pisces, there's this level of like, okay, like the moon is our emotions. Pisces is the mutable water sign. We're much more attached to our emotions this time, but they're in a state of flux. They're in a state of change. And then the moon will make a sextile to Jupiter, and there's a lot more of like, okay, like where can I see the growth? Where can I see the value? Where can I see the security in what I need to change or where I'm feeling? And then as the moon leaves that sextile to Jupiter and conjoins Saturn, there's the solidification, if that's a word. The moon will conjoin Saturn, where there's this kind of having to contain that. The problem with the moon in Pisces is it can feel very turbulent because the moon in Pisces is very sensitive. But with the moon conjoining Saturn, it's kind of like you got to keep it together a little bit here. You got to be, your emotions might be all over the place, but you have to be a lot more controlled and a lot more disciplined about them. The good news is the moon will sextile Jupiter and then conjoin Saturn, where there's this level of like, okay, this is good enough. Like I feel like I'm feeling much more empathetic. I'm feeling much more in tune with my emotions. But as the moon, sextiles Jupiter, it's just like, this is going to be fine. I feel secure here. And then the moon conjoins Saturn, where it's like, now I can kind of control my emotions. And this comes back down to Saturn and Pisces, where Saturn in Pisces is like the way that we have to, again, deal with responsibility and maturity and discipline is in a state of change. It's also, Saturn is co-present with Neptune right now in Pisces. So like none of this is like, there's no manual for life. Like there's no, like no one is going to sit here and tell you how to operate as a human being in the year 2023. You kind of have to figure it out for yourself in a lot of ways. And I look at Saturn in Pisces as like, well, there might be this ideal of how to do that. Once you go to do it, you realize not everything is idealistic. Not everything is going to be the exact way that you want it to be, but you have to make do with what you have. And so I look at the moon conjoining Saturn as like, okay, like this is where I'm at right now. The moon conjoining Saturn is somewhat, depressing. It's not the worst thing ever though. The only reason I would look at it as depressing is like the moon in Pisces just wants to have fun and, be, connected to nature. But Saturn is like, we have to have a level of like, we've got things to do. We've got places to go. We've got things to materialize. And so it's just kind of like, I've said this before in a lot of different horoscopes, but a lot of transits, you can just go back to like, this is just growing up. And I love saying that because you could be 18 watching this and like, yeah, you're fucking growing up. But I'll get like 60 or 70-year-olds. And what I love talking about 60 or 70-year-olds, everyone got super offended at me that I said like elder people. Like, okay, what the fuck am I supposed to call you then? Like, very mature. Okay, come on, let's just stop the shit. You're still in a growing up phase. Like no one tells you how to be 60 or how to be 70. Like you look at your grandparents and you go like, oh, I'll never be like them, or I don't get it. Or it's just hard to imagine yourself as an old person. But then you get there and there's no like rule book, right? But there is a level of, and the growing up stuff is like the Saturn stuff. Like for example, you have your Saturn return, right? A lot of people know what their Saturn return is, but every 7 years, Saturn makes a harsh aspect to natal Saturn. So if you're 7 years old, here's Saturn. I mean, my bad. When you're born, here's Saturn. When you turn about 7 years old, you get your first Saturn square. This is like, okay, you're not a baby anymore. You're a kid. There's a little bit more responsibility in growing up you have to do. But then you turn 30 and you have your Saturn return. But then when you turn about 36, 37, you have your second Saturn return. And you have your second Saturn square. And, people think, oh, I'm just going to grow up and figure everything out when I'm, when I have a Saturn return. But then you have your Saturn square, your first opening Saturn square post Saturn return. And you go, oh, there's actually a lot more things I need to learn and grow up and do. And then you turn 60 and you have your second Saturn return. And then when you turn about 66, 67, you have your opening Saturn square again, where you go, oh, I still don't have it figured out. I still have to grow up. I still have to mature. I still have to take on responsibility here or there. And so I'm saying all this to say, like, it's never ending, right? Life is a journey. Life is cyclical. So don't expect to just have it figured out. But I think on Friday, there's this level of like solidifying things that I think is comfortable enough for you to understand what changes are ahead. So anyway, also on Friday, we have another one of our highlights, which is Mercury sextiling Neptune. Again, Mercury's in Taurus. Our mind, our thoughts are very connected to, again, like stability, security, what's going to make us feel good, what is the most practical, reasonable thing that we can do, and how can we not change our mind about it because we don't want to change our mind. Mercury will then sextile Neptune, where Neptune is about illusion and fantasy and idealism. It is a little bit about being deceived, but I think as Mercury sextiles Neptune, there's a little peek behind the window where it's like, okay, is this actually going to look? It's kind of like when you order something online and you don't know how good it's going to look. And then sometimes it looks better than you thought, and then sometimes it's way worse than you thought. Mercury sextiling Neptune is like maybe you saw another picture like in the reviews of someone actually holding it, and you're like, oh, this actually looks like a little bit better than I was anticipating. There's something about the information that you're given on Friday that allows you to see things, like continuing to see things in that rosy colored looking way. So I like Friday for that. We get to Saturday. The moon will then make a square to the sun because the moon is now, again, still in Pisces and the sun is in Gemini, and it will sextile Uranus. Like, honestly, this is not the biggest day. Saturday is like the moon squaring the sun, sextiling Uranus. The moon in Pisces, where our emotions are all over the place, and the sun is in Gemini, where the sun is like looking for information and questioning things, and Pisces is kind of like, well, you don't have to question things. You just have to feel things out. And so again, there might be this kind of internal struggle between like how you feel energized and where your emotions are at. So I think Saturday will feel a little, not melancholy really, but just a little all over the place, a little scrambly, if that makes sense. But then we get to Sunday. Sunday is when really all of the highlights are. We're going to be having the moon make a conjunction to Neptune, and then it's going to ingress into Aries. It's going to sextile Mercury, and it's going to trine Venus and Mars. So a lot's going on Sunday. The moon first conjoining Neptune is, again, feeling very idealistic, feeling very rosy, seeing things in a very, saturated way, which is fine. Like there's certain times for certain things, and there's other times to not have those things going on. But the moon conjoining Neptune is at least embracing, I think, the idealism, and I think embracing the, what vision that you do have or how you do see things now. And then the moon goes into Aries. Our emotions are now charged up. They're focused on action, on confrontation, on taking initiative, on the spark of life. The moon in Aries is like, we need to go. I need to attack this. I need to go for this. It is a waning moon, so it's not like we're building up for something, but it's like as things are progressing into a new start with the new moon that we have next week, the moon in Aries is like, I need to take care of these things before we get here. The moon will then make a sextile to Mercury, which, by the way, Mercury is now in Gemini. And I'll get to that in just one second. But as Mercury's in Gemini, the moon in Aries, it's like all of a sudden our minds are much more sharper. We're thinking a lot more clear. We're like, all right, this is where I want to take action, and this is the plan. And Mercury's like, yep. And then the moon's going to trine Venus and Mars. There's something about the actions that we're taking that are really uplifting our confidence. Like Mars and Venus are in Leo. Like if you're not acting confidently, and when it comes to confidence, you kind of have to fake it till you make it in a lot of ways. But the moon in Aries making that trine to Venus and Mars is like whatever action you're taking or whatever actions your emotions are invested into are going to build up your confidence. It's the moon trining Venus and Mars. It's fun. It's like, hey, I can have fun and I'm doing this the way exactly I want to. And then the moon's going to trine Mars, where it's just kind of like really uplifting the ego. But sometimes we need an ego lift, okay? Like, yes, the ego can be bad depending on what's going on. But like if you're just always like we need an ego lift. A lot of you could use an ego lift. But Mercury goes into Gemini. Look, I'm going to be talking a lot about this next week because next week we have the new moon in Gemini. But the deal is with this Mercury and Gemini transit is Mars was retrograding in Gemini. Mars was in Gemini from September, October, November, December, January, February, March. And it was a little bit into August. So we'll just say 7 months. And it retrograded. So there was all of this chaos there, and then it just left. Mars left a big old mess in Gemini. Mercury, which rules Gemini, gets to transit Gemini, and like Mercury going into Gemini is just like seeing the mess that Mars left and making sense of it. And the new moon is going to be about cleaning up that mess, because this new moon in Gemini that happens next week is actually at the same degree that the Mars stationed retrograde at. So I think as Mercury goes into Gemini, we're looking back at that Gemini house in your chart where Mars was retrograding for a long time, but we're seeing it with much clearer eyes. We're seeing it with a much better understanding of the situation now that the past is over. And so there's a lot better, like, again, when it comes to communication's going to be a lot better. Our thoughts are going to be a lot clearer. We're going to be thinking really fast, like we just drank a Red Bull, or like for me, I'm drinking one of these stupid bangs. Pluto, though, on Sunday is going to retrograde back into Capricorn. And I talked a little bit about this on my Patreon. I'm curious about the whole debt ceiling thing and what's kind of going on with the dollar. I've changed my opinions about what's going on in the economic situation have varied from time to time about everything, but inflation's still going on. And Pluto and Aquarius, a lot of it has been about like AI and tech. With Pluto and Capricorn, we're going back into the banks, into the governments. And I know as the time that I'm recording this, there's been some sort of debt deal that's been negotiated, but I'm curious about what the impacts about that are in the larger economy. So I think Pluto going into Capricorn is going to be much more economic. But on a personal level, we just got a taste of Pluto and Aquarius from March, April, and May, right? When Pluto goes back into Capricorn, and I don't know about you, but I saw a difference. Maybe it was because it was opposite my sun. But as Pluto goes back into Capricorn, we're talking about power, fear, and control around systems, regulations, corporations, governments, tradition as well. And as Pluto goes back there, we're now dealing with that stuff again, and wherever Capricorn's at in your chart. But this is old news for us. We've been dealing with this for a long time. It's very familiar. Sometimes it's nice to go back to a familiar spot, but it's kind of like, for example, let's say you lived with your parents for the first 30 years of your life, and then you go and live on your own for the first year, and then you kind of come back to revisit your parents. While there's a nice level of familiarity, there's something different about it. Like there's some sort of uncomfortable feeling about it. So that's kind of what's going on with Pluto going back into Capricorn. And on Sunday, another highlight, we have 3 highlights on Sunday. Venus is going to square Jupiter. So the Venus square Jupiter is really interesting to me because Jupiter is in Venus's sign, and this is not going to be the last one that we have. In fact, we have 3 Venus-Jupiter squares throughout the Venus retrograde, and this is just square number 1. Jupiter is in the superior position to Venus. So Jupiter is like, hey, I want to expand and I want to exploit more of the security and the stability and the value and the nourishment in my life. And Venus in Leo is like, great. Well, like I'm going to put myself out here and I'm going to put myself out this way. And I want to be seen this way for that. But there's something about the way that you're putting yourself out there, or again, Venus and Leo, the way that you want to be seen, or the way that, you passionately want to put value into your life, is kind of at odds with what Jupiter is asking you to do. And this is definitely not a bad transit, but it's kind of like, okay, for example, let's say you're like, if you ever watched that TV show, like Sweet 16, like, I guess this is the analogy I'm going with now. It's like, okay, if you're like a 16-year-old girl and your dad's a gazillionaire and he will give anything his daughter wants for her 16th birthday. Okay, well, if you're going to plan your Sweet 16, it's not just going to be like, I'm going to ride on a carriage, on a horse, and there's going to be fireworks, and I'm going to be glorified. It's like, okay, well, you got to plan that shit, sis. Like, do you ever ridden a horse before? Do you have any horse trainers? And you know anybody with a horse? Where's the venue going to be at? It's like, it's just getting a lot more clarity on what the Jupiter and Taurus stuff looks like. Because Venus and Leo is like, well, for example, it's like if you go to a barber, as a white guy, I struggle with this. It's like anytime you go to a barber and you'll tell them exactly what they want, a barber will just go, comb over. You just want a comb over. I'm like, no, I don't want a comb over. I want a tulle on the sides, a little bit of a fade, nothing off the top. And they just hear comb over. There's this level of having to adjust what the vision is and where your values are at. For example, like, or let's say you're planning a wedding and you want, all these flowers, and you want the best venue, and you want the best photographer, and you want the best day, but maybe the day that you want isn't available at the venue. Maybe the catering service that you want is out of your budget. It's like, okay, let's clarify a little bit of what is the most important here in terms of what you actually value, because you can't have your cake and eat it too. But the goal here is to have that happen. So you're just going to have to pick, okay, like if you want your cake and eat it too, well, then you might get a little bit of a small slice. But if you let someone else pick the cake, you might get a bigger slice. That's kind of what Venus square Jupiter is. It's not really a bad transit, but what's important about this is that Jupiter's in Taurus. We're really thinking about value. We're really thinking about security. We're really thinking about what makes us feel good. And Venus and Leo just kind of is like, well, I just want it to be as great as possible. And we're going to have Venus is about to go retrograde here soon. So we're going to go through a whole value shift with what things actually look like in our lives, and how we do want to be seen, and how we do want to be witnessed, and how we do want to be represented. So that's Venus square Jupiter on Sunday. That brings us to next week. Next week, we're going to be having Mercury make a square to Saturn. So that's going to be a little tough, but that's not the end of the world. Next week, we have Mercury sextiling Venus. That is very charming. That is very fun. We have the biggest transit of the year, essentially, which is Jupiter sextiling Saturn. That's a big deal. We're really looking forward to that transit. And then Saturn goes retrograde next week, which is not the worst thing ever, but boy, does the energy shift with Saturn going retrograde. And then we get the new moon in Gemini. It's time to officially clean up the mess that Mars left. So with that being said, I think my final thoughts, I think I was pretty clear about this week, to be honest with you guys. I think my only final thoughts are, June is a good month. A lot of the good transits happen, but I think I said this either last week, but it's like May and June are setting up the dominoes for July and August and September and October. So a lot of this is just getting us ready for what comes next, if that makes sense. This isn't the battle. This is preparing for the battle. So I'm going to leave you guys off with that. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, being here. I absolutely love and appreciate every single one of you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get updated on all the current astrology transits and how to navigate them. Again, if you want to support the channel, check out my Patreon. I got a lot of goodies for you guys to take advantage of as well. Subscribe to the channel. Please like this video, comment, let me know what you're excited for, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.